We protect our own." The words echoed through the streets of Grover's Hollow as over 200 bikers rolled into town. 24 hours earlier, an elderly black veteran was pulled over by police while quietly eating breakfast at a diner. What happened next would turn a sleepy town on its head. Jeremiah Whitaker's hands were steady as he folded the creased corner of his book and set it gently beside his chipped coffee mug. The Thursday morning rush had ended, if you could call 5 regulars a rush, and the only sound in Ruthie's diner was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the low hum of an old country gospel song playing over the radio. At 72, Jem didn't move fast anymore, but he still carried himself like a man who'd once commanded the respect of troops. His wool cap was worn but clean. His army jacket told a quiet story in faded patches. 82nd Airborne, Vietnam, Kuwait, Kosovo. No bravado, just history stitched into fabric. He came here every week like clockwork, sat at the same booth, ordered the same thing, black coffee and toast. No cream, no sugar, just like his wife used to make it before the cancer took her 6 years back. In a town like Grover's Hollow, a man like Jem stood out. Not just because he was black, which was rare enough here, but because he was quiet. He watched. He listened. And most folks didn't quite know what to make of that. The bell above the door jingled. That soft little chime Ruthie always said was the heartbeat of her diner. Jem didn't look up. Not at first. 2 police officers stepped inside. Officers Reynolds and Kemp. Local boys. Raised in Grover's Hollow. Known more for writing parking tickets than anything else. They spotted Jem instantly. Reynolds nudged Kemp. "Looks like our guy's already settled in," he muttered. The room didn't exactly fall silent, but something shifted. Forks slowed. Conversations faltered. Ruthie, behind the counter, kept wiping the same spot on the laminate over and over again. "Excuse me, sir," Reynolds said as they approached Jem's booth. "You mind answering a few questions?" Jem closed his book without looking up. "Always depends on the question." Kemp hesitated. Reynolds didn't. "We had a call. Said someone was wandering near Town Hall earlier, matching your description." "Wandering?" Jem asked, finally meeting his gaze. "I walked from the veterans' home. Long way round. Is walking a crime now?" "It's not a crime," Kemp jumped in. Folks get nervous." "Nervous," Jem repeated, tasting the word. "At a man with a limp and a book." Reynolds shifted. "Let's just see some ID." Jem reached slowly into his coat. No sudden moves, not at his age, not with uniforms watching. He pulled out a wallet and handed over a tattered military ID. Reynolds read it out loud. "Jeremiah Whitaker, retired." 22 years, Jem said quietly. 3 wars. Kemp looked uneasy. Reynolds didn't blink. "That doesn't give you a pass," he muttered. From behind the counter, a voice rang out like a bell. "Doesn't mean you get to treat him like a criminal either." It was Ruthie. Tiny, white-haired Ruthie, built like a sparrow and meaner than a hornet when riled. "You boys walk past that drunk Larry McGee 3 times a week and never ask for his ID. But you stop Jem? Every Thursday he's been here. Never said a word out of place." Reynolds straightened. "Just doing our job, ma'am." "No," Ruthie said, hands on her hips. "You're doing a power trip, and you can do it outside." Kemp flushed. Reynolds looked ready to argue, but the eyes of the diner were on him now. "I think we're done here," Kemp muttered. Reynolds handed back the ID, said nothing, and the 2 turned and left. The bell above the door jingled again. The tension eased. Jem stared down into his coffee. Ruthie came over and refilled it without asking. "You okay?" she asked gently. He gave her a small nod. "I've seen worse." "Not in here you haven't," she said. "And not ever again." That afternoon the story spread through Grover's Hollow like grease on a griddle, and by the next morning 200 bikers were rumbling into town. They weren't just passing through, they were coming for him. The town thought it could shame him into silence, but what happened after that diner incident would shake Grover's Hollow to its roots. Some folks stared, others whispered. But the next morning, no one could look away. Let's rewind, because things were about to get loud. The Thursday Jem Whitaker stood up without raising his voice. The foundation of Grover's Hollow shifted just a hair. Not that anyone would admit it, but people felt it. They heard the scrape of Ruthie's voice, sharp as a knife, cutting through the lazy quiet of the diner. They saw her defend a man whose only crime was being noticed. By sundown, every hardware store, gas station, and church potluck had the same story, told and retold with a few more details each time. In some versions, Jem cursed out the officers. In others, he was packing a pistol under his coat. And in the worst ones, spread in hushed tones over lawnmowers and lemonade, he was part of some group. One of those people. The truth didn't matter. The town had made up its mind. At 5:30 a.m. the next day, Ruthie stood on the cracked sidewalk outside her diner and stared at the taped-up sign. Closed until further notice, spray painted over it in red. No biker lovers in Grover's. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. She ripped the sign down with one jerk, fingers clutching it like she wanted to crush the words out of it. The door hadn't been broken. The windows were still intact, but something had been violated. The code. The unspoken rules of who belongs and who doesn't. Inside, everything looked normal. Coffee grounds already in the machine, stools lined up like soldiers, but the silence felt heavier now. Jem arrived just before 6 o'clock a.m. Same booth, same book, same gate. He didn't ask about the sign. Ruthie didn't bring it up, but she saw the flicker in his eyes when he noticed the ripped tape near the doorframe. He sat down like always, like nothing had happened. But both of them knew. Everything had. By 8:30, the place was nearly empty. Normally, by now, she'd be working the griddle hard, serving up over-easy eggs and bad jokes to men who smelled like diesel. Not today. Not after last night's gossip burned through the town like a field fire in August. Only one customer came in during the lull, a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, familiar face. Deputy Mayor Ellen Carden. She ordered a tea, not her usual coffee. Ruthie noticed that. "I just came to see how things were," Ellen said after a pause, stirring her tea too long. "They're fine," Ruthie replied flatly. Ellen lowered her voice. "Look, I don't agree with what happened yesterday, okay? But there's pressure. People are talking." "People have always talked," Ruthie said. "This town's addicted to its own echo." Ellen gave a tight smile. "I'm just saying, maybe it's best to let this cool off." Ruthie leaned on the counter, close enough to make Ellen shift back. "Let me be clear. I won't be cooling off, backing down, or forgetting. That man has more integrity in one pinky than half this town has in its Christmas parade." Ellen didn't reply. She finished her tea and left a $5 bill. No tip. Jem sat quietly, but Ruthie could feel his eyes watching. Around noon, the diner was empty. Not a soul inside. The phone didn't ring. No to-go orders. Even the radio cut out for a few minutes, like the static didn't want to hang around. That's when it started. A low rumble in the distance, like distant thunder on a dry day. Ruthie walked to the window, unsure why the hairs on her arms stood up. And then she saw them. First one, then 3, then a dozen. Motorcycles. Rolling down Main Street like steel horses in formation. They didn't roar, they arrived. On purpose. On message. Jem turned to look. Just once. Then went back to his book. Ruthie whispered under her breath. Well, I'll be damned. It wasn't just one chapter of bikers. It was many. Organized, unified, angry, but in control. They weren't there for trouble. They were there for him. You could hear them before you saw them. The kind of low, rolling thunder that makes your gut tighten before your brain even catches up. They weren't coming to make a scene. They were coming to make a point. And the town wasn't ready. The first Harley pulled up at exactly 12:42 p.m., a black street glide with chrome handlebars and a tiny decal on the side that read, Righteous Few MC. Behind it came another, red, older, louder, then more. 10, 20, 50. The rumble echoed off the buildings like a war drum calling back a forgotten army. By 12:50, Main Street was packed. Motorcycles lined both curbs, then spilled into the diner's parking lot, and then into the empty grocery lot next door. Riders dismounted slowly, deliberately. Some stretched. Some pulled off helmets to reveal long beards, bandanas, or bald heads glistening in the sun. Men, women, white, black, brown, inked to the neck, scarred, grizzled, young. Grover's Hollow hadn't seen this many strangers since the county fair in '97. And back then the rides didn't come with steel-toed boots and leather vests. Ruthie stood frozen at the front window, dish towel clenched in her hand. Jem didn't move. At exactly 1:00 p.m., the diner's bell jingled. One man entered. He was broad-shouldered, with a snow-white beard and wraparound sunglasses. On his vest, a patch that read, President, Rock River Chapter. Another one below it simply read, Respect. You Ruthie? He asked, voice like gravel. That's me. He gave a short nod. Name's Big John. We're here for Jeremiah. Every head turned to Jem's booth. He looked up from his book, slow as ever. Eyes calm. Didn't know I sent out invitations, he said. Big John smiled. You didn't. Your name traveled without one. Ruthie blinked. How did y'all hear about this? Big John tapped the side of his vest. Phones, friends, brotherhood. What happened in here yesterday? Word gets around, and when one of ours is disrespected, we don't forget. But you're not all angels, right? She asked cautiously. John chuckled. Nah, we got brothers from 5 clubs here. Hell's Angels, Righteous Few, Iron Souls, some independents too. We don't always ride together, but today, we stand together. By now, more riders had entered. Quiet, respectful. They filled booths like church pews, tipping their heads at Jem as they passed. A younger man, maybe early 30s, Latino, with a neck tattoo that read Blessed, approached Ruthie with a quiet smile. You got room for 200 hungry riders? She looked around the tiny diner, which could hold 45 on a good day. Not even close, she said honestly. The young man grinned. That's okay, we'll wait. We brought folding chairs. That's when Ruthie noticed a truck outside. A supply truck. Flour, eggs, sausage, bacon. She hadn't placed a restock order. She turned to Big John. You do this? He nodded. One of the boys called your supplier. Told him to load up the biggest order you've ever made. And don't worry about the bill, it's covered. Ruthie's throat tightened. I don't even know what to say. Just say order up, Big John said. You're about to have the busiest day of your life. Outside, more bikers kept arriving. Locals gathered across the street, staring in disbelief. Officer Reynolds drove slowly past in his cruiser. Didn't stop. Didn't wave. Jem finally stood. He didn't make a speech, didn't thank anyone. He just walked to the front of the diner, stood beside Ruthie, and looked out at the crowd. The sun caught the gleam of his army pin. Big John stepped beside him. This town forgot who you were, he said. We didn't. The street was packed now. The smell of engines and hot pavement filled the air. But it wasn't about noise anymore. It was about presence. And Grover's Hollow had never felt so small. They came in waves, not shouting, not rioting, just showing up. And for a town used to quiet prejudice and backdoor gossip, that presence alone was a kind of reckoning. By mid-afternoon, Ruthie's diner wasn't just full. It was sacred ground. Inside, the smell of bacon and black coffee filled the air. Outside, the sound of idle motorcycle engines rumbled like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. By 2:00 p.m., Ruthie's diner had transformed into something it had never been before, a war room, a sanctuary, and a line in the sand. They came through the door in groups, 5, 10 at a time, always polite, always patient. Some riders waited an hour just to stand at the counter and say, "Thank you for what you did for Jem." Some didn't even order food. They just showed up, because showing up was the point. The teenage waitress, Ellie, called in on short notice, darted between tables like a hummingbird with a cracked wing. She looked overwhelmed. Ruthie put a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great, kiddo." "I've never seen this many people in one place," Ellie whispered. "Are they safe?" Ruthie looked around at the sea of leather, denim, and respectful nods. "Safer than anyone else we've had in here lately." The bikers weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Their patches did the talking. Some said Hell's Angels, others said Mongols, Outriders, Desert Dogs. And a few, patched only on the back, simply said, Brotherhood. There were doctors in that crowd, veterans, mechanics, ex-cons, grandfathers, and at least one woman wearing a baby in a front carrier with pink goggles strapped to the infant's head. Grover's Hollow wasn't sure how to process this. The mayor drove by twice and didn't come in. The pastor from Grace Chapel parked across the street, pretended he was heading to the hardware store, and stood outside for a good 20 minutes before finally walking in and ordering a coffee. To go. But the one everyone watched was Officer Reynolds. He came back. At 3:17 p.m., walked right through the crowd of motorcycles, his cruiser parked illegally on the curb. No one stopped him. No one spoke. Inside, he pushed open the diner door, and the bell rang like it always did. Except this time, it felt different. Sharper. Conversations went quiet. Jem was seated at the counter now, nursing a second coffee and reading a new book, The Souls of Black Folk. Fitting. Reynolds approached, trying to keep his swagger, but the room swallowed it. He stopped just shy of Jem's stool. "You got quite a turnout here," he muttered. Jem didn't look up. "Must be nice," Reynolds added, "having a gang show up every time you get your feelings hurt." Ruthie's hand tightened on the coffee pot. Jem turned a page, then another. Finally, he looked up. "You still think this is about me?" Reynolds blinked. Jem nodded toward the room, where a biker was tying a little boy's shoelace for him, while his dad, a fellow rider, grabbed napkins. "This ain't about me. It's about us." Reynolds scoffed. "Us? You think this is unity?" Jem smiled, and it wasn't a nice one. It was the kind that cuts deeper because it's tired. "You know what unity looks like?" he asked. "It looks like people who never met me driving 200 miles to say, 'You don't treat one of ours like that.' It looks like white, black, and brown folks breaking bread and not caring who sits where. It looks like you realizing you picked the wrong side of history over a cup of damn coffee." Reynolds opened his mouth, but Ruthie cut in. "You want something, officer? Or you just here to loiter?" The room chuckled softly. Not mocking. Just certain. Reynolds turned. "You'll regret this." He left without ordering. A biker by the jukebox whispered, "Promise?" Later, Ruthie brought Jem a piece of pie on the house. "Apple?" she said. "Didn't know your favorite, but you look like an apple pie kind of guy." He smiled. "My wife used to make it. This'll do just fine." Outside, the line still hadn't thinned. And inside, Ruthie's diner wasn't just serving meals anymore. It was serving notice. They say small towns don't forget. What they don't say is how often they lie about what they remember. But on that Friday afternoon, something began to shift. Because in Ruthie's diner, strangers stopped being strangers. And the town's silence broke for good. By 4:30 p.m., the scent inside the diner was something magical. Smoked bacon, warm cinnamon, and the kind of fried chicken that makes grown men weep. The fryers ran non-stop. Plates were flying out so fast Ruthie thought her hands might just give out. Ellie had called in her older brother to help bus tables, and a second delivery truck had shown up with backup supplies, organized by a biker named Moose, who could barely fit through the doorway but knew exactly how to reroute a supply chain in 3 phone calls. Outside, kids had gathered, drawn by the thunder of the bikes, the glittering chrome, and, let's face it, the fact that nothing ever happened in Grover's Hollow. Parents stayed at a distance, suspicious, but curious. Inside, the tension had softened. Conversations flowed. Laughter, even. Jem was still at the counter, though now his book lay closed beside him. He was in the middle of a story, a real one this time, about jumping from a plane at night in Kuwait and landing on a camel instead of a dune. The man listening, across from him, was Dave Simmons, a local mechanic and part-time church organist. He'd lived in Grover's Hollow his whole life, voted for the same sheriff 3 elections in a row. Never liked trouble. But now Dave was leaning in, nodding, sipping his coffee like he was seeing Jem for the first time. "You ever get scared up there?" Dave asked. Jem chuckled. "Only when I hit the ground." Dave laughed, then paused. "You know, I judged you yesterday. I heard what happened and thought, well, maybe he was up to something. I didn't know you, but I made up my mind." Jem didn't look angry, just tired. "That's how it always goes," he said softly. "World teaches folks to be afraid of someone who don't look like 'em, uniform or not, and when folks get scared, they stop thinking." Dave nodded. "That was me." A biker slid into the booth next to them, broad-shouldered, indigenous, long braid down his back, tattoos up both arms. His name patch said Bear. He looked at Dave. "Fear's easy," Bear said. "Takes work to listen." Dave looked at the two of them, then reached out and shook Jem's hand. Then Bear's. That moment, just a handshake, should have been small. But in that diner, with the whole town peering in from behind old grudges and thin curtains, it was a shift. At the window counter, a retired librarian named Mrs. Jeanette Henderson was sitting with 2 bikers, one in his 70s with a beard like an avalanche, and another younger woman with bright red dreads and a patch that read, "Valkyrie Riders MC." They were talking quilting. Seriously, quilting. Turns out Valkyrie used to teach home ec before she started riding. And Avalanche? He'd made his own tent liners in '68. By the back corner booth, Ellie's brother, Mark, was mid-debate with 3 bikers over the best barbecue in the Tri-County area. It was getting heated. Plates were involved. The town, it seemed, was being peeled back. Layer by layer. Not all at once, but conversation by conversation. And Ruthie? She noticed it all. At one point, she stopped wiping counters and just stood there, soaked it in. This wasn't just a diner anymore. It was a border being erased. Outside, someone had brought out a portable grill. The smell of ribs joined the air. Inside, the cash register had to be emptied 3 times. And in the midst of it all, Jem sat in his same booth, watching it happen. Not with pride, but something quieter. Hope. Every story has a turning point. This one didn't come with fanfare. No roaring engines, no defiant speeches, just a man in a hospital visitor badge, and the weight of a promise he hadn't made. What happened next would bring the room to its feet. It was just past 5:30 p.m. when the diner's rhythm hit its peak. The tables were still packed. Outside, riders had set up fold-out chairs, holding paper plates like communion wafers. Across the street, the entire porch of Grover's Hollow Pharmacy was filled with townsfolk who claimed they were just out for fresh air, but hadn't blinked in half an hour. Inside, Ruthie was moving on pure adrenaline. Ellie was icing her wrists. Mark was flipping burgers with the focus of a bomb squad technician. And Jem? Still at the counter, still quiet, a statue in the storm he never asked to start. Until the bell jingled. This time, the sound cut through like a note played out of tune. Heads turned. A man stood in the doorway. Tall. Older. Clean-cut. Black slacks. White shirt rolled to the elbows. A hospital visitor's badge clipped to his front pocket. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes looked like they hadn't closed in days. He didn't wear leather, didn't come on a bike, didn't belong. But then he stepped forward. "Jeremiah?" the man asked. Jem slowly turned. The lines on his face, carved by years and memory, softened. Just barely. "Ray Mercer," the man said. "My brother told me what happened." For the first time that day, Jem rose from his stool without the usual slowness. He and Ray embraced the way only old soldiers do, tight, no words, just a moment of being understood. "You got here fast," Jem said. "Would have been faster, but Jesse had a good morning," Ray replied, his voice cracking just slightly. "They let me leave for a few hours." "Jesse?" Ruthie asked. Ray looked her way. "My daughter." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photo. A girl, maybe early 20s, bald from chemo but smiling wide, 2 thumbs up in a hospital bed. "She's fighting. Stage 4 lymphoma. They just started an experimental treatment. That's why I was passing through yesterday, on my way back from talking to her doctors." Ruthie blinked. "You were the man those cops were harassing?" Ray nodded. "I didn't tell anyone to come, just mentioned it to my brother, and the phone lines started lighting up." Jem clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't need to say a word, Ray. They showed up because you're one of them." Ray turned, finally taking in the room. Bikers laughing with farmers, patches side by side with Sunday slacks, a town halfway through waking up. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. A man stepped forward, a hulking rider with one eye and a vest that said, "Grim, NorCal Chapter." "You don't say nothin'," Grim said. "You just sit, eat, rest." Then Grim turned to Ruthie. "You got enough pie back there, ma'am?" "More than enough," Ruthie replied. "Well," Grim said with a grin, "you're gonna need one more fork." Ray sat next to Jem. Ruthie poured him a coffee without asking. He sipped it, then exhaled like he hadn't since the day his daughter got her diagnosis. A few tables down, a biker started playing a soft blues riff on a travel guitar. Someone else hummed along. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But it was right. Ray looked over at Jem. "I never expected this." Jem smiled. Neither did Grover's Hollow. Outside, the last rays of sunlight were bouncing off the chrome like it was sacred. And inside, 2 old men sat side by side, not just breaking bread, but history. Grover's Hollow had always been a town of invisible fences, lines drawn by skin color, social class, family names. But sometimes fences break, and all it takes is one long table and a chair pulled out in quiet welcome. The light was changing. That golden hour glow had started to roll across the town's old red brick buildings, casting long shadows and warming chrome bikes until they gleamed like polished armor. The scent of grilled meat and cinnamon butter was thick in the air. It smelled like a Sunday reunion. Inside Ruthie's diner, no one noticed the time anymore. But they did notice who walked in next. It wasn't another biker. It wasn't a protester. It wasn't even a cop. It was Mrs. Clarice Denton. Church elder. Quilting Guild president. Voted most traditional by the Grover's Hollow Garden Club 4 years in a row. She pushed the door open with 2 hands like she expected it to be heavier. The bell jingled. Conversations dipped. A few riders glanced up. The locals noticed her right away. Clarice Denton didn't just show up places, she approved places. She walked in slow, her floral print purse held like a shield, eyes scanning the sea of vests, tattoos, and unfamiliar haircuts. For a second she looked like she might turn back, until she spotted someone. Mrs. Jeanette Henderson, sitting in a booth, laughing, with a biker in wraparound shades and a ponytail down to his belt. Clarice blinked. Jeanette waved. A beat passed. Then Clarice stepped forward. Then she didn't ask, didn't tiptoe. She slid into the booth beside Jeanette, like it was Bible study, and looked the biker square in the face. "You with the ones who came for Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the man said respectfully. "Name's Gus, Riverside Chapter." She extended a hand. "Clarice Denton, Methodist Women's Choir. I don't like bullies." Gus smiled and took her hand. "Neither do we." Jeanette burst out laughing. "Clarice, I told you, they're not what you think." Clarice gave a small smirk. "They're exactly what I think. Good people who scared the hell out of the bad ones." And just like that, the table got louder. Across the diner, a man named Marcus, president of the Riverside chapter, was helping a group of volunteers unload another shipment of food from a borrowed school van. Extra sweet tea, sandwich fixings, and enough canned goods to restock Ruthie's pantry for a week. "Just in case the boycott keeps up," he'd said. "We're not just feeding ourselves, we're feeding the next week of your business." Ruthie had tried to argue. Marcus had just smiled. "This ain't charity, Ruthie. It's respect." Back inside, Ray Mercer and Jem were mid-discussion about military pensions and VA hospitals when they were interrupted by a soft, unassuming voice. "Excuse me, Mr. Mercer?" It was a teenage girl, maybe 14, holding a phone. "My mom, she said to show you this." Ray took the phone. The girl stepped back. On screen was a video call. A pale but smiling face filled the frame. "Hi, Daddy." It was Jessie. Ray froze. He hadn't expected this, hadn't dared hope she'd be strong enough. "I'm here," he whispered, voice cracking as he crouched near the counter. Behind him, Ruthie instinctively lowered the volume of the diner radio. The entire place, dozens of bikers, locals, even a few teens leaning against the soda machine, went quiet. "I heard what happened," Jessie said from the screen. "They told me about the diner, about you, about him." She glanced at Jem through the phone camera. "Are you the one who sat with my dad?" Jem smiled. "I was just reading my book, ma'am. He sat with me." She laughed softly. "Thank you." "Get some rest," Ray said gently. "You're doing the hard part." "I love you," she said. "I love you too." The screen went black. Ray stood slowly, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. "I didn't expect that," he said to no one in particular. Someone handed him a napkin. It was Grim, the NorCal one-eyed biker who looked like he could bench press a pickup truck. "Family matters," Grim said quietly. "That's why we're here." Jem nodded. "That's why I stayed." And the room exhaled together, a breath that had been held for too many years. Because now the town wasn't just watching, it was beginning to believe. By sundown, there wasn't a soul in Grover's Hollow who hadn't heard the roar of bikes or the silence that followed. And that silence? It wasn't fear. It was reckoning. Because when people feel safe standing up, others start standing too. The last rays of sunlight spilled over Main Street, catching on license plates and black leather jackets, turning the air into something golden and holy. It didn't feel like Grover's Hollow anymore. It felt like something older, bigger, Like maybe this was what community was supposed to be before fear told it otherwise. The street outside Ruthie's diner had turned into a block party. Bikers were grilling on fold-out pits. Kids took photos sitting on custom choppers, with the owners grinning and adjusting helmets for them. Someone had pulled out a Bluetooth speaker and queued up a blues playlist that seemed to match the tempo of the night. No signs, no chants, no slogans, just presence. Ruthie stepped outside and stared down the line of bikes, stretching nearly 2 blocks. It looked like a parade frozen in time. She noticed them before anyone else did. 3 high school seniors, Letterman jackets, tentative steps, crossed the street from the corner gas station. They looked nervous. One of them, Marcus Jr., was the mayor's son. Ruthie narrowed her eyes. The tall one approached a group of bikers seated on milk crates, eating burgers from paper plates. Hi. We just wanted to say thanks. One of the bikers looked up, tattoos across both forearms, thick beard, missing front tooth. Thanks for what, kid? For coming here, for sticking up for Mr. Whitaker. My dad says, he says things, sometimes, but we knew it wasn't right. The biker stood up, easily a foot taller than the boy. Everyone around went silent. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a black patch with white letters that read, "Respect earned." He handed it to Marcus Jr. "Start here," he said. "Then live it." The kid looked stunned, then nodded, clutching the patch like it was a medal. Inside the diner, Jem was still holding court, though he'd barely said 10 words in the last hour. People came to him now, not out of pity but curiosity. And somewhere deeper, reverence. Across from him sat Principal Holloway. 40 years in the school system, known for being fair but firm, especially when it came to who got detention and who didn't. "I owe you an apology," Holloway said, voice low. Jem blinked. "Do you? You taught my son history at the community college. I didn't even know until today. He told me last night. Said your class changed the way he looked at this country. Changed how he looked at me." Jem nodded slowly. "History's funny that way. It sticks." Holloway hesitated, then offered his hand. The old veteran and the old principal shook in the middle of a diner filled with people who never thought they'd see that day. In the corner booth, a small-town journalist named Elise Faulkner, who usually wrote about bake sales and school board meetings, was furiously taking notes. "This is a story," she whispered to herself. "A real one." Next to her, a biker handed her a USB stick. "Photos," he said. "From the ride down. Everyone signed off." She blinked. "Thank you." He nodded. "Tell it right." Outside, Ellie's little cousin, about 8 years old, was sitting on the back of a silver Harley, helmet too big for her head, giggling like she was royalty. Her mom stood nearby, at first stiff, then smiling. Ray Mercer watched from the curb, arms crossed, eyes soft. He hadn't said much since the video call with Jesse, but he didn't need to. The scene unfolding in front of him spoke louder than words. And Jem? He watched it all like a man watching a field catch light in the best possible way. Not burning, but blooming. The fences weren't gone. But they had cracks now. And through those cracks, hope. When a place like Grover's Hollow changes, it doesn't happen overnight. But it can happen in an afternoon, if the right people stand still long enough for others to step forward. That's what happened next. It wasn't loud. It was sacred. Dusk fell slow and sweet, the last orange light painting Ruthie's diner in a warm halo. The buzz of bikes had softened to idle purrs. The grill outside still hissed. Paper plates piled in trash bags. Kids danced barefoot in the grass by the sidewalk. And for the first time in living memory, no one locked their doors for sundown. Inside, every booth was still full, of laughter, stories, and people who had no business being friends yesterday. Now, they were family in leather. Jem stood at the counter, his hand resting lightly on the back of Ray Mercer's chair. For most of the day, Jem had been silent, not withdrawn, just listening, letting the story write itself. But when Marcus, the Hells Angels chapter president from Riverside, stepped up and cleared his throat, the room quieted, like it knew something was about to be said that mattered. Marcus raised a hand, not with bravado, but with purpose. Before this day ends, we got one more thing to do. Jem blinked. Ruthie crossed her arms, watching. Marcus reached into his vest and pulled out a small folded patch, black background, white thread, simple. Friends of the Angels. He held it up. This patch isn't given, it's earned, and we don't hand it out lightly, not to civilians, not to politicians, not even to other riders who don't walk the walk. He stepped forward and set the patch gently on the counter in front of Jem. But today, you didn't just walk it, you stood it. When the system poked you, you didn't flinch. When they came for you, you sat still. When the town turned its back, you stayed. He turned to the crowd now, voice rising just enough to fill the room. And because he did what he did, we got to show who we are. There was a pause, full of meaning. Jem stared at the patch, then back at Marcus. You sure? He asked, voice low. We protect our own, Marcus replied. Today, you made that circle a little bigger. He clapped Jem on the shoulder. Welcome in. Jem nodded once, the weight of it not missed, but Marcus wasn't done. He turned to Ruthie. You too. Ruthie blinked. What? You stood your ground, Marcus said. You didn't care about color, badge, or patch. You cared about right. From a side pouch on his belt, Marcus pulled out a second vest, custom-stitched, black leather. On the back, under the words Friends of the Angels, it read, Ruthie's Diner, where respect is served hot. The whole diner stood, cheered, applauded, banged forks on tables. Ruthie looked like she might cry. Damn it, she muttered. Y'all gonna make me ruin my mascara. The vest was placed behind the counter, hung next to her late husband's framed apron. Jem watched the moment, arms crossed, something stirring behind those still eyes. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. You didn't have to come, he said to Marcus. We did, Marcus replied. Because if we don't show up when someone like you is treated like less, then the patch don't mean a thing. At that, something changed. The locals began stepping forward, tentative, humble. A young couple brought a tray of homemade peach cobbler. The librarian handed out dog-eared books from her car trunk. Even the town preacher walked in and asked if he could offer a quiet prayer for Jesse's recovery. Ray nodded, tears in his eyes. As the prayer ended, someone started singing. Not loud, just a biker grandmother in the corner booth, humming, Lean on Me. Others joined. One voice, then two, then the whole diner. And outside, the engines were quiet, but the hearts, they thundered. By morning, the chrome would fade, the engines would quiet, and the crowd would thin. But Grover's Hollow would never forget what they saw, or who they nearly lost to silence. Some revolutions come with fire. This one came with breakfast. The night air had cooled by the time the last burger sizzled, the last coffee poured, and the last story shared. The streets of Grover's Hollow, once filled with suspicion and whispers, now echoed with the clinking of utensils and the crackling laughter of strangers who no longer were. Inside Ruthie's diner, Jem sat at the counter, alone for the first time all day. Not lonely, just finally still. Ray had left around 9 to head back to the hospital. Jesse had asked him to bring Ruthie a bouquet, sunflowers, her favorite. He promised to return with Jesse one day soon. She wants to shake your hand, he told Jem. But she wants to hug Ruthie. Outside, most of the bikers had mounted up, waving goodbye with the same quiet dignity they'd arrived with. A few chapters lingered, helping clean up, hauling trash bags, breaking down folding chairs. Even Big John helped mop. Before he left, he handed Ruthie a small, square box. Inside, a single key. "What's this?" she asked. John grinned. "New griddle. Custom made. You'll need it." "For what?" "For next time." The streetlights flickered overhead as the last bikes rolled out in staggered lines. Locals stood on porches, not with suspicion, but with a strange new expression. Wonder. By the time Ruthie locked the diner door, the only ones left were her, Ellie, Mark, and Jem. Mark had slumped into a booth and passed out. Ellie sat on the counter, barefoot, sipping cold root beer and staring at the leather vest hanging behind the register. "You know," she said, "this was the first time I've ever seen the diner this full." Ruthie glanced over. "Full's easy," she said. "It's the why that matters." Jem smiled at that. He stood, groaning slightly from the long day, and walked over to the wall where the vest hung beside Ruthie's husband's old apron. For a long time, he just stood there, studying it. "You gonna take it home?" Ruthie asked. Jem shook his head. "No, leave it." He looked around the diner like he was memorizing it. "Let it hang right here, not for me. For the next man who walks in and thinks he's invisible." Ruthie swallowed. "You're not invisible, Jem." "No," he said softly. "Not anymore." He turned to go. Ellie jumped off the counter. "Wait." She held something out. A folded-up receipt, scribbled in her handwriting. At the top, "Total, $0. Below that, paid in full, by respect." Jem chuckled and tucked it into his coat pocket. As he opened the door to leave, the bell jingled, just as it always had. Ruthie watched him step into the quiet street. A few neighbors waved. One even called out, "See you next Thursday, Jem." He raised a hand, never turning. She stood there a moment longer, then flipped the sign in the window. Open. Always. The next morning, Ruthie arrived to find something waiting. Not another hate note, not graffiti, a package, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a strip of black leather. Inside, a photo. Jem at the counter, smiling, framed in hand-carved wood, taped to the glass, a note. "For the bravest diner owner we've ever known, for the man who never asked for a fight, but showed up anyway. For every small town that forgot what big hearts look like. We protect our own. RM and the Chrome Circle." Ruthie hung it next to the vest, and when Officer Brennan walked in a week later, no swagger, no smirk, just a quiet nod, she served him coffee with the same smile she gave every customer. Because that was the legacy now. Not anger, not revenge, but dignity served hot, with a slice of pie. And the story? It didn't end there. Because stories like this never really end. They just change the people who hear them. One diner, one man, 200 bikes, and a town that finally remembered how to look someone in the eye. Would you like a compiled version of all 10 scenes in one document, or maybe a voiceover-style script adaptation?